evening, everybody. Welcome to our Fly Fishing 101 virtual series class brought to you by Tennessee Wildlife Federation and the Hunting and Fishing Academy. My name is Jed Beasley. I am the East Tennessee field rep, work specifically with the Hunting and Fishing Academy. We're really excited to have you guys out tonight. We're really looking forward to kind of working through some of this material together. We're very lucky to have Mr. Sean Austin. Sean is one of our hunt masters who helps us planning events, also running a lot of different things across the state. He's been gracious enough to take some time out of his schedule to walk us through some of these concepts we're going to talk about tonight. So Sean, why don't you go ahead and just introduce yourself, talk a little bit more about your outdoor experience, your fishing experience, things like that. And then we'll go over a couple of things and we'll get started with some of the material for the evening.
Thanks, Jed. I actually started fishing when I was 2, caught my first trout when I was 2, and I've been fly fishing for about 18 years. You know, not all that was super productive. Started out slow like a lot of people do, but just stuck with it, and then guided out west in southern Colorado and northern New Mexico for quite a few years. And now I'm back in Tennessee enjoying the mountains and streams.
Yeah, awesome. Well, we're glad to have you. Also on the call tonight, we've got Mr. Chris Hearn. If you guys have been following along with any of our turkey hunting virtual classes this spring, you'll recognize him. Chris is going to be working on kind of behind the scenes tonight, making sure everything runs smoothly. So I'm going to let him talk a little bit about some of the housekeeping things tonight and how it's going to work. We're going to try to keep everything within the hour time frame. Just as a reminder, y'all can see us, we cannot see you. And I'm going to let Chris talk a little bit more about how you're going to ask questions and some of the things you might need to expect coming up later on in the class. So Chris, you want to talk a little bit about that right quick, and then we'll get started.
Yeah, thanks, Jeb. So tonight, you'll be able to see Jeb and Sean. We can't see you guys. So you also look in the bottom of your screen, you have a Q&A option. That's where you can enter your questions for tonight. Most of the questions you enter, we will try to get Jeb and Sean to answer those questions live. And there could be a possibility if it's something that I can answer, I could just type it in there. And then also you have a chat function. If you need to send a message without everyone seeing, you can send it just to the panelists, or you could also submit questions through the chat, but for the most part, we'll be using that Q&A function. Also in tonight's virtual class, we'll have some pop-up polls just to kind of get a judge of y'all's experience level. So we'll give about 10 seconds to get those answered when they pop up. And that's really it. I hope you guys learn as much as I feel like I'm going to. Being a West Tennessee boy, I'm going to be learning just as much as most everybody else about the fly fishing. So.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Chris. And like we've talked about kind of in just the overall description when you guys signed up for the course, we're going to cover some pretty foundational things just to give you a good kind of starting point in terms of fly fishing. If you've done it before, maybe you've gone out a few times, or maybe you're really experienced with it. It might be review, but for other people, it might be brand new. So we're hoping that everybody gets to learn something. Like I said, feel free to ask your questions. We're going to do our best to get to as many of them as we can. But we've already got a pretty full room tonight. It's looking like we've already got over 70 folks in the class already. So if we don't get to your question, feel free to send me an email, and we'll be sure to get an answer out to you once the class is over this evening. So before we jump into some of the actual coursework, and we let Sean do most of the talking, I'm going to go over just kind of a brief Tennessee Wildlife Federation overview. If this is the first time that you're participating in one of these virtual classes with us, again, we're the state's largest and oldest nonprofit dedicated to conservation, sound management, and the wise use of Tennessee's great outdoors and our resources. So a lot of people get us confused with TWRA, who is the state agency, but we are a completely separate organization. And our work covers a pretty broad area, including policy work on the Hill in Nashville, habitat restoration, youth engagements, many others. So some of the programs that you might recognize with us, if you've been around the Federation for a while, or the Scholastic Clay Target program. Currently, we've got about 1,700 kids participating in the shotgun shooting sports across the state. Hunters for the Hungry. If you're a deer hunter, you probably know about this program. Feeds Tennesseans all across the state by providing venison to hunger relief organizations, and all of that venison is donated by Tennessee hunters. And then also the Hunting and Fishing Academy. And our program, and the biggest reason why we're here and why we do what we do, is because there's been a steady decline in the number of hunters, the number of fishermen the past few decades. That means fewer licenses being sold, which leads to decreases in conservation funding. And those funds are what makes hunting and fishing possible here in Tennessee. So our goal with the Hunting and Fishing Academy is to reverse that trend and create new hunters, new anglers, so that those opportunities to hunt and fish continue to exist for future generations. And our focus is always education. Always has been, always will be education. We want to equip you guys with the skills you need to be successful. So we're here to answer your questions. We know not everybody grew up in a hunting family. And so our program is designed to kind of mimic that generational transfer of knowledge. We've got a pretty extensive volunteer network. We work with a lot of other organizations. So if there's ever anything that you guys are just, have questions on, or you're concerned about, send those our way. Odds are we'll know the answer, or we'll know somebody that does know the answer, and we can get you in touch with somebody nearby. So now we've talked a little bit about our program and the Federation as a whole. What are we going to be talking about tonight specifically? So tonight we're going to be covering the basics of fly fishing and just what you need to get started. There's going to be a lot that you can learn outside of this class. We're not going to cover everything you can know about fly fishing, but we want to give you guys a good starting point. So we're going to try to work through these things the best we can. The first thing that we're going to go through is just some basic gear needs. That's where we're going to spend most of our time. I'm going to let Sean talk a little bit more on that. I can try to come in and fill in the gaps where needed. And then also we're going to talk about just some of the fundamentals of fly fishing and, what to expect when you go out. And then a little bit later, we'll talk about some of the species that are commonly pursued by fly fishermen, as well as some places you might go to start that fly fishing adventure. And then also just some general regulations that you might need to be aware of. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to you, Sean, and let you kind of start working through this. And guys, if you have questions, like I said, we'll be sure to stop and try to address those periodically. But as they come up in your brain or whatever, just go ahead and type them out. And then when we kind of get to the point where we'll have some free time to answer them, we'll do our best to get to everybody's questions. But just as you think of them, go ahead and send them in that question and answer function. And we'll get going there. Oh, and before I forget, Chris, let's go ahead and do our poll question coming up right here in just a second. And guys, this poll is just to kind of help us get a good understanding of what your experience level's like. So just go ahead and take a few seconds to answer that. And then once we get those answers in, we'll let Sean start talking about some gear needs for fly fishing. So we got a pretty good mix. We've got basically a 50-50 split on if you've ever been fly fishing before. So that's good. It looks like we've got a lot of new folks, but we might have some more experienced folks as well. So that'll really help us kind of guide discussion as we go forward. So I'm going to be quiet for a few minutes. Sean, if you want to go ahead and kind of get us started, we'll be quiet and listen to what you got to say tonight.
Absolutely. So thank you, Jeb. All right. So why fly fish? Because it looks cool. You might have seen it in movies, TV shows. You might have passed by a stream and seen some guy or gal in there, beautiful water around them, whipping this rod back and forth, big colorful line. I mean, it looks cool. And why get started? There's a lot of different reasons. It's also therapeutic. Like I said, you can be in the river with all that water around you. I always tell people guiding trout that they don't typically live in ugly places. So it's really neat to get out there and just immerse yourself in nature, immerse yourself on the water, and some of the things that you'll see while you're out there. You're not going to see in a house. You're not going to see going down the street to the grocery store. I mean, it gives you a good reason to get outside. No messy bait. There's plenty of people that like the idea of fishing, They like to eat fish, but they don't like fooling with worms and stinky bait and all that sort of stuff. So with fly fishing, you don't have to deal with that. And challenge yourself. You know, that's big and bold down there, because I think that's why a lot of people get started in it. And I think that's what really keeps people in it. I mean, you can spend your entire lifetime and you might master a thing or two here and there, but fly fishing is so diverse that you can really just go on and on. You can target different species. You can utilize different tactics. You can go after big fish on really light tackle. You know, it's an endless list, and you can really challenge yourself in a lot of different ways with that. All right, so the basic gear needs. With fly fishing, you really don't have to spend a whole lot of money, regardless of what people say or what you might think, to get started. You need a reel with backing and line, and we'll get into that a little bit later. You need a fly rod. You need leader and tippet. You need flies, and for the most part, you need a net. I mean, you might be able to get by without a net, but we're just throwing that in there. So that's really it. You know, it doesn't take a whole lot to get started. One thing, you know, I want to kind of talk about, and some people might know, some people might not, is the difference between fly fishing and your conventional fishing, like your spin cast, spinning fishing. Fly fishing is different. It's a whole different concept. Instead of using the weight of a lure, or, you know, the weight of the bait, or slapping a bunch of weight on there to make your cast, with fly fishing, you're actually using the length of this rod. And it's a long, long slender rod. And the weight of the line, you can see in this picture, you know, that fly line looks thick, and we'll look at another picture later, but that fly line is thick for a purpose. It's thick because we're going to be managing with our fingers, and it's thick because we want it to weigh. You know, that's what we're going to use, the weight of that line, to make our cast. I mean, we're going to be fishing with stuff. Some flies are almost negligible when it comes to weight. So we utilize the length and flexibility of that rod along with that thick, heavy line to make our cast. So your fly rod, like I said, it's different than your conventional rod. And it could be one piece, it could be 6 pieces, it could be 6 foot, it could be 11.5 feet. You know, there's different rod lengths and sizes, and that's all to tailor to your different fishing techniques and your different species of fish that you're targeting. Really, a general good starting rod would be, you know, a 9-foot 5-weight. That's gonna be a really good rod, all around general rod to start with here in Tennessee and really throughout the country. Your reel, you know, starting out, and especially if you're fishing smaller creeks, if you're targeting the trout here in East Tennessee, or you know, even just outside our borders, the line is mostly there the reel is mostly there just to hold the line and the backing, keep it all organized, keep it out of the way. But as you start progressing, or if you're targeting larger fish, that reel plays a more crucial component to your basic gear. By that, I mean that reel can actually be used to help you fight the fish. Reels have what's called a drag. If you're familiar with fishing, you might be aware of this, but it's different on a fly reel also. On a fly reel, you can adjust that drag. Some of them, not all, but you can adjust that drag to, you know, kind of match the size of fish that you're chasing after and the line that you're using. But that reel handle has to spin. So unlike your conventional fishing where you're holding onto the reel by the handle and the rod, you don't want to do that with fly fishing. And we'll get into that, how to hold the rod and everything here in a little bit. But while we've got this picture up, I really want to talk about the line some more in the backing. So like I talked about, this line is thick. Here in this picture, it's kind of a neon green. It can be bright blue, fluorescent orange. I mean, it's thick, heavy line. And, you know, it's going to take up a lot of space. So if you're targeting bigger fish, you're going to run out of that line quick if that fish goes across the lake or down current. So what we do is we utilize backing. And backing is just some thinner diameter line that we connect to the base of the reel. And then we connect that backing to the fly line. So here in this picture, you probably got, you know, 90 or so feet of fly line, and you might have 200 or 300 yards of backing, just depending on the reel size. And what that allows you to do is once you hook a bigger fish, it really allows you to play him. That fish, you don't have to stop him dead in his tracks. You're going to let him take the line out and really kind of wear himself out and then bring him back in. And we'll kind of get into that in our fundamentals section. Oh, before we move to the next slide, just know whether you're completely new to fly fishing, never been, or if you're experienced angler, in the middle picture here, we've got this person holding the line underneath their fingers. And when I start talking about line management, that's what I'll be, really harping on is you can't manage the line unless you've got it under control. And that's a very good grip. It's a very good way to manage your line on that one.
And Sean, while we're still on this note, it looked like we had a question talking about just sizes of fly rods. So just kind of from smallest to biggest, what could you expect to see in terms of size of a fly rod when you're getting ready to
Absolutely. So that's a great question. Like I said, you can match it. There's fly rods go by another thing. It's called weight, and it'll say WT on the rod. If you're targeting small fish in a small creek, you might use a 3 weight. So that's a lighter weight rod. They can go all the way up to 14, and that'd be, for sailfish or something crazy like that. Or if you're targeting monster catfish or stripers down below the dams here in Tennessee. But, small stuff, if you're targeting trout here, 3 weight's fine, all the way up to 6 weight. I mean, it really depends more on your style of fishing. But you might not want to take a 14 weight with you that you use to target marlin or something like that on the Clinch River. So and that's targeting little trout. But a good standard for entry would be a 5 weight, and that's kind of the middle of the road weight as far as the strength of the rod. And like I said, a 9 weight, or excuse me, a 9 foot. So that 9 feet, that length is a really good all around general purpose. And that's great to target panfish, trout, bass, you name it, anything that we have here in Tennessee, it'll really get the job done. That 5 weight, that kind of middle of the road rod, you might be a little undermatched if you're targeting stripers or larger bass or anything like that. But, fly fishing is really, a lot of it's art. It's not, so much a science, it's a lot more art. And there's nothing that says you can't land a monster bass, whether it be largemouth or smallmouth or stripe, on a 5 weight or even a 3 weight rod. It's just going to be more challenging. So that's a great question. All right, so I want to talk a little bit more about the lines, and if I seem like I'm going fast, it's just because I want to cover this and then get to the questions and really help you guys answer some things that may have been on your mind for a while. So your most general, probably most common fly line is going to be floating. And here again, that weight that I mentioned with the rod, for the most part, you're going to match the weight of the rod with the weight of the line. And if you go to a fly shop, they're more than happy to help you out. I highly recommend visiting your local fly shop or one local to wherever you're fishing. And they're very helpful. But so with that line, that floating line, you can actually fish for just about anything. And that floating line, it's self-explanatory in a way that it's just meant to float. It's not meant to do anything other than float on top of the water. You've got sinking line, and that line's mostly intended to target, more of your open water, deeper fish, especially in lakes, whether it be trout or bass or even catfish. That sinking line is going to get your fly down deep. Like I said, we're not using the weight of the fly or the lure. We're using the weight of the line. And this line's specifically engineered to get that fly down deep. Probably the second most common is our sink tip, though. Our sink tip line, it could be a floating line at the base and then go to a sink tip, or it could be an intermediate or a neutral buoyancy line and then go to a sink tip. And what this does, it really enables you to throw big flies. I mean, big monsters. I've got one here, and this is, small compared to what you could actually throw. But it's feather, fur, and hooks, so it doesn't weigh much. But that sink tip line is going to allow you to throw it, make a good cast, and bring this fly down in the water column. And then you can work this fly. Very common in streamers for bass on ponds, lakes, common for targeting bigger trout in rivers. Sink tip line's a pretty good line to have in your arsenal. But this picture here, we've got thick green yellowish line. So how are we going to trick the fish into biting our fly if we're using this thick, heavy, bright green, bright orange line? Well, that's when the leader and the tippet comes into play. All right, and here's a list of knots associated with this picture here. You don't have to know all of them. If I was to say one knot to learn right out of the bat, right out of the gate, that'd be the uni knot. And the uni knot, you can tie your fly line directly to your leader. You can tie your leaders together. You can tie your tippet to your leader. You can tie it, directly to your fly. The uni knot's a very good universal knot. However, a lot of leaders will come with a pre-made loop, okay? And a lot of your fly lines will have a welded loop towards the end of them. And what you can do, it's called a loop-to-loop connection. You just simply slide one loop, the loop from the leader, through the loop on the welded end of the fly line. Pull the tagging of the leader through, and then cinch it down, and you're ready to go. So that leader, and leader is important because we're going from this thick, heavy line, and fly fishing is all about energy. When we're casting, we're putting energy from our rod hand into the rod, and then delivering that through our stops into the line. And as that energy goes, it's transferring. We want it to be as smooth as possible. We want that fly line to lay out. Okay, so we don't want to necessarily go from our thick, heavy fly line to something really small, really thin diameter like our tippet is. So we utilize leader to kind of help us out with that energy. We go, and your leader is going to be clear, just like this picture on the right. It's going to be clear. It's going to allow you to fool that fish. Most all of them will have a taper, so you're going from thicker, heavier nylon, as in this picture here, to a finer, thinner diameter. And then, you can start like this leader right here, 4X. You can take that right out of the bag, connect that to your fly line, and then start fishing. You don't have to pull it out, tie tippet on it, and then start fishing. So, leaders for the most part are just rigged up, ready to go. Tippet does play a big part, especially as you utilize that leader more and get towards smaller flies. So it can be confusing, but when in doubt, read the instructions. This chart that Jeb found is great. It'll kind of tell you the difference between our tippet X's, or our breaking strengths. Most all your manufacturers will put a breaking strength or a pound test on it, and that's the same thing. But this will give you a little reference to go by. And really, you want to match, like I said, you want to match that line and that rod. You want to match the whole deal to your targeted species. So down here, you've got 4X for trout, absolutely fine. If you're fishing below, say you're fishing below some of the tailwaters, fishing below some of the dams for some of the maybe trickier fish in the state, you might, especially trout, you might want to go wider. If you're not getting bites, that's typically my go-to. If I'm not getting bites on what I'm fishing, and I know that these fish are eating, and I've tried my flies and I don't have anything else to try, I'll drop down my leader and my tippet size, or just my tippet size. And that leader, like I said, you can tie your fly directly to it. But as you retie flies, or as that leader gets chewed up by fish, you're retying, you don't want to go from a 9-foot leader and work it all the way up to where you've only got 2 feet. Fish can see pretty good, so that's why these leaders might be 9, 12 feet even. So you do that, and then you utilize this tippet as you retie, or if you want to go smaller, you might have a leader and you're utilizing it. You say, man, these fish are chewing on something, but it's something tiny. I can't even see it. This tippet, you might have to go to a 6X tippet really light, but that might be the only thing that fits through the eye of a fly that resembles what those fish are feeding on. I've got a box of small ones here. Flip it over to this side. So I'll try to get in focus, but there's my pinky, and there's some teensy tiny flies. So if you're targeting something finicky, kind of like a trout, yeah, tippet becomes pretty important. But here's a good example, good run through of that tippet. And there again, it doesn't have to be anything great. You can even use something from the store, leftover spool of line. Use 6-pound test, just leftover from your spooling up your spinning rod, or leftover at a store. A lot of times they'll give it away for free. But as long as you've got something clear breaking up that fly line and then that fly, so you're fooling the fish, you should be in good shape.
Sean, before we move on away from the fishing line, I've got a couple questions. One from John. He asks, is the backing just regular fishing line?
Right, that's a great question. No, the backing, if you're familiar with fishing and fishing line, the backing's more like braid, and you can actually use braid. I don't recommend it just because it'll have a tendency to cut through that fly line. That fly line is actually, it's not fragile or delicate, but it is sensitive to sharp objects. Typically what it is, it's a woven material. It can be gel spun or Dacron or something of that nature, but it's a woven material, and it's very, very strong. Typically, most of your fly line weights, or your weights 1 through I'd say 9, are about the 30-pound test break strength, and most all your backing is going to be in that range. You can get backing that's heavier duty, so a 50-pound test break strength, but that's a great question, and it's not to say that you couldn't use regular fishing line or that you couldn't use that braid, but the backing is made specifically for, getting on that fly reel, connecting to that fly line, and doing a good job of not cutting through that actual thicker fly line, which is, and that's got a lot to do with knots too, but we can touch on that a little bit later. Great question.
Great. I've got a couple more questions. We'll push a couple towards the end if we get time that's area specific. But Daryl asks, is there any good resources for learning to tie knots?
Yes. And it'll come up here, and once we go over the casting, because unfortunately I can't do a casting demo for you guys today. But yeah, YouTube. And it sounds silly, but even as a guide, if I needed to learn something, if I needed to learn a knot, if I needed to learn how to tie a new fly, if I'd heard of some new technique, YouTube is a great resource if you've got internet. If you don't, almost every single library has books that you can check out with different knots in them. And just utilize the resources that you have. But YouTube's probably my go-to. Great question.
And then the last one, and I'll let you move on. What is the biggest trout line? And I assume they're talking about breaking strength and everything.
Right. Well, it all depends. So it all depends on what you want to use and what those trout are going to be fooled by. Like I said, tailwaters being water below a dam, those fish tend to get pressured more. They get kind of the Harvard education, if you will. Just because so many people are targeting them, they get so much junk thrown in front of their face. You're not going to fool them with 14-pound test, typically. But if I'm going on a big river, say the Clinch up by Jeb's hometown around Knoxville, and I'm throwing a streamer, I very well may put just 20-pound test line that you would get from Walmart. You put on your spinning reel or whatever. I might do about 4 to 6 feet of that directly from the fly line to my fly. So it just depends on the fly you're using, and you know what you can trick those trout with. You can trick them with thicker line on that streamer because you're moving it fast. It's a lure. You're ripping it through the water, trying to make it look like a bait fish getting away. But yeah, that's a great question. It all depends.
Great. You can move forward, Sean, and then we'll come back to some of these other questions we got.
Good deal. We'll go to the next slide. All right, so flies. I just got a little bit ahead of myself, but we've got dry flies, and this is very general. Everybody, there's countless flies. Some of the names will just leave you scratching your head. But general types, we've got dry flies there on the left, and these are going to be flies. Like I said, most flies are, fur, feather, thread, metal, synthetic material, whatever. But dry flies are flies that are tied in a sense that they're designed to float on top of the water, meaning that they're going to stay dry, hopefully, and they're going to float on top of the water. These have hackle. It's just a feather wrapped around tight. That's going to give them more surface area, and they're light. I mean, like we were talking about earlier, they're really light, almost negligible. You can blow them across the room from the palm of your hand. But dry flies are meant to be floated on top of the water. Next picture over with that worm-looking thing, those are our nymphs or our wet flies. And these, you can often, almost anytime you go to a stream, you're going to see bugs flying around on the top, right? But most all your insects that hang around water, they spend 80 to 90 to 99% of their life submerged in that water. So just because you don't see fish chewing on stuff, breaking the surface, jumping up out of the water to get things, doesn't mean they're not feeding. Okay, these nymphs are a great way to target fish, no matter the water condition, no matter where you are. And these flies here, posted up on this slide are primarily trout flies, but it doesn't mean that you can't. I mean, you can catch anything on the San Juan worm. That's that pink fly there in the top right corner. It's great for panfish. It's great for trout. You can catch bass on those things. I mean, I've caught some pretty sizable catfish on them, but it's really you want to match the hatch, and you might hear that or you might have heard that. But what I mean by that is you want to match the fly to kind of what those trout are eating, what's hatching in the water, whether that's on a tailwater here in the state or whether you're on the Tennessee River and the mayflies hatching, you really kind of want to match it. And there's flies that don't look like anything at all. It just looks like somebody had a bad hair day on a hook, and sometimes that's going to catch them. But if you're having trouble hooking fish, just keep trying. You'll find something. They're always going to be eating. If they don't eat, they don't live. So on the right here, far right, we've got a popper, top right. Now poppers, and for every sense of the function of the fly, it's a dry fly. It's meant to be fished on top of the water. The difference is, though, it's going to have a flat head or a concave head, and you're going to pop it just like you would, a popping lure for bass. And these things are deadly on bass. They're deadly on panfish. It's really exciting to get a trout on them. They're just a really fun fly to fish. And along with the poppers and the dry flies, when the fish comes up to eat these, since they're on the surface, you're going to see that fish come up and eat it. Whereas the nymphs or the wet flies, that's below the surface. Typically, you're not going to see the fish eat it. And then on the bottom, that's one of the all-time go-to flies for most fly fishermen, and that's a woolly booger. It's a funny name. Like I said, there's flies that have all sorts of different names, but that's just the standard. And you can fish it like a streamer. You can kind of pull it in real fast, or you can just let it drift down a stream, let it sink, towards the bottom of the lake, and slowly bring it in. And it's going to catch some fish. I've caught carp, bass, trout. Had some gar hit them, but no success putting the hook in them. It's just a very effective fly. So And we are kind of breezing through this, but I just want to give a little bit on flies, and I'm sure we'll have some questions on them, but we'll go to the next slide.
Yeah, Sean, we got one question right here you might be able to answer pretty quickly, just in terms of, where people might be able to buy different types of flies. I mean, where do you go to get flies, and what's a good resource for people who are wanting to kind of
Absolutely.
start building up a good arsenal of them?
Absolutely. So if you're lucky enough to have a local fly shop, just go in there and bug the snot out of them. They're going to sell flies, and they're always going to be a little bit more generous with information. If you do buy a couple flies from them, don't go in there and break the bank, but definitely support your local fly shop. And those guys, I mean, they're doing it because it's their passion. They're gonna set you up with the right flies. If you tell them what you're chasing after, if you tell them where you're fishing, you can always order anything offline. But yeah, fly shops offline. I think most of our Bass Pro shops and Cabela's in the state have a fly fishing section. It's a small one there hidden in the back, but most of them do have a little fly fishing section, and it's neat. I mean, it's neat to go and see and look at these things. I tie my flies. I tie most all my flies with the exception of a few saltwater ones, but yeah, and that's another great thing. You can get as immersed into this fly fishing thing as you want to. You can make your own flies, you can make your own leaders. There's really, like I said, there's no end to it. You can always challenge yourself. So that's a great question.
Yeah, awesome. We'll keep moving forward here.
All right. So we wanted to put this in, and because really, in all truth, the bare bones we covered earlier, but typically, depending on what type of fishing you're going to be doing, you're going to want some extra gear, waders, and you don't have to. When I started out, I didn't have waders. What waders are, it's just pretty much waterproof pants that are going to keep you dry. They're going to keep you warm. And if you're in cold water, it's just going to allow you to fish more comfortably and longer. When I started out, I had tennis shoes and an old pair of shorts. And that water gets cold, but you don't need waders, but they are nice to have. A fly fishing vest, vests are great. I wore mine out. I'm now using a sling pack, but just something to hold, your flies. Because like I said, if it'll frustrate you if they're not biting, and there's been days where I've gone through boxes of flies trying to figure it out. But you want to have something to hold all your smaller gear. And if you're on a river and you see some trash, go ahead and just pick it up and throw it in that vest or your pack. Clippers are great. You don't want to ruin your teeth. You can clippers are like 99 cents. You can buy a bunch of them and afford to lose them. Don't lose your teeth biting line and chomping on flies or barbs or something silly like that. Strike indicators. All right, different sounding name. All strike indicator is, it's a bobber. It's going to let you know when that fish, hopefully it's going to let you know when that fish is biting the fly or striking your fly. And polarized sunglasses. These are, I mean, I don't go fishing without them, period. It's not only going to save your eyes from the sun, but whipping that fly around, especially in the beginning of your fly fishing journey, you want to protect your eyes in case a hook goes astray. And also, it's going to cut through the glare on the surface of the water. So it's really an asset to have. It'll allow you to see into the water some, hopefully see a fish, and figure out your game plan. Help you figure out your game plan to go after that fish. We'll breeze on to the next one. All right. So like I said, I'm not unfortunately going to be able to do a big tutorial on casting and all that, but basics on how to hold the rod. You want the reel underneath the rod. You don't want the reel. You want it underneath, and I'll kind of hold this up. So you want underneath. You want to grip it with your dominant hand. I'm right-handed, so this is going to be my right hand on the handle of the rod. Okay, I'm going to have my thumb towards the end of the cork. If this rod was all fully put together, it's just the base piece, the bottom piece. This would be my balance point right here. And I know that because I took my finger and kind of balanced it all out. but you want to make it comfortable for you, balance point or not. You want to have a good, comfortable grip. Thumb towards the north end of the cork or the handle here, and then you know, I'm gonna say it a couple times, and I've said it already, but as you start making your cast, or after you make your cast, go ahead and get that line underneath your trigger finger. So we'll go ahead and jump to the next slide. All right, basics of casting, just get the fly in the water. You know, we're using, like I said, typically a 9-foot rod, 8.5, 9-foot rod. You know, I mean, that's a cane pole, you know, and you can catch fish on a cane pole all day long. Just get the fly in the water. You don't have to be a pro. You don't have to have any prior experience or professional casting lessons. Just get the fly in the water. If you can get that line, the fly line, the thicker fly line with the leader attached to be the length of your rod, and then get all that straightened out on the water, I mean, you're working with 20 plus feet of length there. So, you know, that's plenty enough to catch a fish. But there's two types of cast I would recommend everybody focusing on starting out, and that's your standard or your basic cast. And as you watch videos, here again, resources on learning how to cast. YouTube is great, and also videoing yourself on a phone or with something else is a great way to kind of critique yourself. But the standard or basic cast is just, it's a backward motion and then a forward motion. Okay, and what you're doing is you're putting energy into that rod, coming to a stop. When you stop, that rod flicks the energy into the line, and then it's making a loop, and then you drive it forward. And as it goes forward, you come to a stop and then give a little bit, and it's going to hopefully lay that line out nice and straight for you. The second cast is a roll cast, and that's, you know, look it up on YouTube, get a book. It's just, you're starting here. It's just one motion. You're starting here, kind of like a Statue of Liberty, and then you're rolling that rod forward. And that's going to allow you to cast with your back up to a tree, bushes, a crowd full of people. I mean, it's a very, very handy cast to know and to be able to do here in the state, especially if you're targeting trout. If you're going to be sticking on a pond, it's still great to learn, but not as important as your basic cast. But it's a great one to have in your arsenal. You can practice on the grass, and fly fishing is just not all about catching the fish. You know, I know several people that they love casting the fly rod, and they've never caught a fish. So, you know, just do what suits you and what you like. But these are the two I recommend, and YouTube, like I said, is a great asset.
Sean, we do have a couple questions. Nathaniel asks, how do you grip the line on the trout rod?
Okay, great question. See if I can pull mine out here. Like I said, you want your dominant hand to be on the cork. And part of this whole idea of line control is that hopefully you're gonna have that thicker fly line underneath your trigger finger, your index finger. If you don't have an index finger, or if it doesn't work right for you, use your next one, and so on and so forth. But that's going to give you control to actually move forward. I'm just going to cut this and pull it out. Bear with me here, guys. So, and you'll notice as I'm pulling this line, that reel handle is spinning. And just take note of that. You know, like I mentioned earlier, if you're fighting a fish, you don't want to have this two-handed death grip, or you don't want to have your hand on this reel, because it's not like a spinning reel. For this line to move out, you're actually going to have to let go of that reel handle. There we go. All right. So this is it. All right here. Just, I keep it underneath my index finger. Some people use 2 fingers. I like just one. And we'll get into this in just a little bit once I start talking about the fight, how to bring that fish in. But this right here is going to be your best friend. When you're excited and you go to set that hook, you're going to squeeze the rod anyways, so you'll be set. And your left hand or your right hand, your hand's going to know where its counterpart is. So you can not even look, grab knuckles, and then be able to grab this line. All right, the bite. Like I said, it's a little different depending on what type of fly you're fishing, what tactic you're using. This big, beautiful brown trout looks like he ate some big, green, nasty streamer. Some lure type looking fly similar to this, just different color. And that fly is going to be in direct contact. I mean, that fly fisherman is going to be feeling that strike every time. He's pulling that fly fast through the water, and that fish is going to attack it with a lot of energy. Your surface flies, your dry flies, you're going to be able to see them. And like I mentioned, your nymphs, your subsurface flies, it might not be so obvious. There's been plenty of times where I can't tell. Is that the bottom? Is that weeds? I don't know. But there's no real way to know. And trust me, I've fished a lot of different rivers. There's no real way to know unless you set that hook. So set that hook. When in doubt, just set that hook. And I'll do a little motion to kind of mimic that, but we'll jump to the next slide. All right, so set that hook. If we're gonna do that, if we're gonna set that hook, like I mentioned, we've got the line here while we're fishing. Hopefully, we're practicing good line management. To set that hook, if it's anything other than a streamer, what I like to do, what works best for me, is I'm typically fishing my rods parallel with the water. I've got it in a horizontal plane, and then if I think I've got a bite, or if I see that I've got a fish that just took my fly on the surface, I'm going to jerk straight up and back. Boom. Okay. And notice I'm here, got a good thumbs up. The line's underneath my trigger finger here. Try to do it this way. So I'm ready. I'm in business. All right. And what I'm going to do from this point forward, I'm going to let the rod do the work. Okay. I'm here. I'm keeping good tension on that fish. The tip of my rod is pointed straight up. It's going to hopefully have a good bend in it. And that's fine. You don't need it to point literally straight up. You just want to have your thumb, as long as your thumb's on the cork and pointing up, you're in good shape. So you want to keep good tension on that fish. Like I said, try not to do this two-handed death grip. It's only natural, but don't do this, because if that fish goes, if he pulls really hard, if he makes a big run, you're not going to be able to relax his finger and let line slide out. Okay. That fish, if he pulls, he can break this line just like a fish can in conventional fishing. If your drag's too tight, if you've got too much pressure on him, he can pop off. The one exception to keeping that tip up is if you catch a fish like a bass, bigger trout, and they go for a jump. If they jump clear out of the water, just we say bow to the show. Just kind of gently tip that rod down. That's going to give them a little bit more room to shake around. They're not going to pop the line, jumping out of the water, shaking their head, or coming back and hitting that water. So just kind of bow to the show. Thank that fish for jumping out of the water for you and being real nice and pretty. And just manage that line. You might start here where you've got, try to pull this out of the way, where you've got line directly going to the reel, or you might have all sorts of slack between your trigger finger and your reel. That's not a problem. Just control it by easing your finger out, letting that line slide out. Or if you can't get to the reel fast enough, just with your free hand, pull that fly line towards your hip. It's called stripping in, and that's gonna help you manage that line, keep a steady, constant pressure on the fish, but not too much. And land that fish. It takes a while to get your first fish on a fly rod sometimes, and you want to land it. If you're by yourself, what I typically do is I'll point that rod tip back over behind my shoulder or back behind my back. And what that'll do is it'll pull the fish in towards me, and I'll use my net to then go up underneath the fish and scoop it up. We've got these long rods with this long leader. So use that to your advantage. You're not going to be able to just bring them in, whip them in like a standard fishing bait caster, spinning rod, that type. So use that length of the rod, pull that fish in towards you by angling that rod back and then scoop them up. All right, let's go.
And Sean, I know we were talking about this earlier, when me and you were just talking, but in with fly fishing, you've got the reel, but does it ever make sense when you are trying to bring that fish in to use the reel, or are you just stripping the line back to you most of the
Yeah,
time?
yeah,
Which
absolutely,
is the better route to take?
absolutely. And what I would like to do on bigger fish, I always would prefer to try to get them on the reel. And when I say on the reel, I just mean, if say you start out with slack like this, right? You've got, and it could be a lot more. Say you've got that kind of slack in your fly line between your finger that's holding, keeping pressure on that fish, um, and your reel. So if you've got that much slack, what I would go ahead and do, as long as that fish isn't just screaming out, trying to pull a line away from you because you don't want to break him off, you just kind of keep a steady pressure. If he's got to run, let that line slide through your fingers, and then, or your finger, and then once he gets tight with the reel, then you can just ease that finger off and let the reel spin. Okay. Most of your fly reels, you've got the handle side here. Okay. I'm right-handed. So my handle is going to be on the left side, right? And then on the opposite side of the handle, typically is where your drag is going to be. Okay. This one is just the silver knob here. Okay. And I can loosen it, I can tighten it. And you want to check that before you start fishing. It can be a painful day if you finally hook a big one or hook one, period, and your drag's either too tight or too loose. If it's too tight, that fish might pull line from the reel, or not be able to, and pop off. If it's too loose, that reel might spin way too fast, and you can get a tangle, a bird's nest, if you will, similar to your conventional style of fishing. But keeping that fish on the reel, you'll feel a little bit more comfortable. A lot of people do, especially if you've got your reel dialed in, and you can test it and see what the pressure is. It's better to go have too little pressure than too much, because if that fish is gone, then not only do you lose a fish, but typically you lose a fly and some other things. So having it under pressure or under adjusted is better than having it over adjusted. And then you can fight the fish directly from the reel. So it's kind of hard for me to demonstrate, but I would, if I'm on the reel, it's okay to let go of that line when you've got the fish on the reel. Okay. Otherwise, especially big fish, if you've got this line and it's thick, it's got a little, this one's pretty slick, but any sort of line zipping through your fingers, it can burn. I mean, it can burn, and it can burn bad. So you can let that reel spin freely, and really fighting the fish is all about being patient, uh, line management, and wearing that fish out, whether you're directly on the reel or if you're just doing everything by hand. And you can do everything by hand. You don't have to reel it in. You can have the line here. If that fish is getting tired, or if he's swimming towards you, with your free hand, pull that line down towards your hip. Okay. And then just come back up and do it again. Do whatever you need to do other than running out of the river backwards, because that's just going to set you up for a cold swim or a bad day jumping out of the boat. But yeah, keep your feet in place. And other than that, just do whatever you need to do to keep good pressure on that fish. Without that pressure, there's a good chance that fish is going to shake his head and spit that hook out of his mouth, especially if you're doing something, barbless, or just in general. You don't want to lose that fish. It's going to
Gotcha.
happen. I lose fish every time I go, if I'm lucky enough to hook them. But yeah, that's a great question. The reel can be a great asset, and practice. I would always have people cast to me, and I would grab that line, and I would literally run across the field. If you've got a dog that's well trained, maybe you could do it. But better yet, just find somebody that's willing to work with you a little bit and practice on dry ground. get the kinks worked out before you hook that good fish or hook your first fish. So great question.
Awesome. Awesome. We're getting a little short on time, so we'll try to go through these next few things a little bit quicker, and then we'll spend a few minutes towards the end just trying to answer some of these last minute questions. So Sean, if you want to, we can keep the ball rolling here.
Absolutely. Yeah, just some quick notes on fish handling. If you are practicing catch and release, try to handle those fish as little as possible. Use barbless hooks, even if the regs don't say so. It's just a good way to protect our resources. If you're gripping them for a picture, just make sure your hands are real wet and use two hands, kind of cup them around the pec fins, which are right behind the head, and then around the tail. And better yet, if it doesn't hurt you too bad, just leave them in the water for a picture and measurements. And there's some great ways to take your pictures in the water, pictures of the fish in the water. Otherwise, just keep them fresh and eat them as soon as you can. I mean, I eat a lot of trout. Some fly fishermen are purists and they do catch and release only. I love eating trout. I'm always going to eat trout. And I love eating our bass and our catfish here in the state too. So, keep them fresh, keep them on a stringer, put them in a creel, which is just, a mesh bag or a wooden kind of basket. Do whatever you can to keep those, put them straight on ice. Just keep them fresh and enjoy them. They taste great.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Sean, I'll let you catch your breath here, and then we'll move into kind of the next section that we want to talk about. We've touched on it a little bit already, but that's really just some of the different species of fish that we have here in Tennessee that you guys can start pursuing as fly fishermen. So, and Sean, if at any point you've got something to add, feel free to just jump in. But we'll work through these things a little bit quicker, and then we'll try to answer some of you guys' questions at the end. So, obviously, when we think about fly fishing specifically, I think for most people, I know for me, the first thing that I think about is trout. And whether you knew it or not, Tennessee actually has some of the best trout fishing in the country. And we've got three different types of trout that you can catch here in Tennessee. The first one is brook trout. Now, those are the only native trout species to Tennessee. They're typically found in higher elevations, those clear, cold mountain streams. A lot of places up in the Smoky Mountains, if you're lucky enough, you can sometimes find those native wild brook trout. The second is the rainbow trout. These are actually introduced to Tennessee in the late 1880s. So they're actually now the most abundant trout species in Tennessee, but originally we didn't have these here on this side of the Mississippi River. And you can find these in over 300 streams just here in East Tennessee. So if you're going out trout fishing, odds are if you catch one, more than likely it's probably going to be a rainbow trout. And the last one is a brown trout. And a lot of times you find those where you find rainbows. They coexist together pretty much. Anywhere you find a rainbow, you can find a brown. They typically live a little bit longer as well. And because of that, they can grow to be larger. So when you hear people talking about, catching big brown trout, those are kind of one of the more trophies as far as when you're trout fishing and when you're fly fishing specifically. Everybody wants to catch one of those big, mature brown trout. But not all fly fishermen pursue trout and trout only. I mean, if you can catch it on a spinning rod, you can just about catch it on a fly rod. And I know Sean's kind of talked about that already. But I mean, just panfish, things like little sunfish and bluegill, crappie, you can find those in lakes and creeks, rivers all across the state. They're great for beginner fly fishermen. A lot of times if you can find a good bed of bluegill or some type of little sunfish like that when they're spawning, it can be a lot of fun to throw a little worm or something like that out there and really have a good day catching those little panfish as well. So if you're looking for kind of an easier place or an easier way to maybe kind of get started in fly fishing and kind of have some higher rates of return, higher frequency of catching something, that might be a good option for you as well. And then the other one that a lot of people go after is bass. Just like people that fish with spinning rods and bait casters, things like that. Largemouth and smallmouth both are great for fly fishing on. Again, you can find those just about any creek or lake, river in the state. They're very abundant and they can be a lot of fun to catch on a fly rod. So moving on to kind of our next section, I've seen a couple questions come across. So if you've asked a question regarding some of these things, we'll cover it now. I didn't have a slide for region 1. A lot of the places that I'm going to list out here for you is where to fish, more so geared towards trout, just because that's kind of the big one that everybody wants to pursue. So this will give you kind of a rough idea where you might be able to go catch some trout. There's not a lot of places in region 1, West Tennessee, that you can catch wild trout and things like that. A lot of times TWRA, they're community fishing lakes during the winter months when the water is cooler, and you don't have to worry about the fish dying or something because of hot water and warm temperatures. They'll stock those community fishing lakes with trout during the winter months to let people be able to go out and catch those kind of in some more in some just untraditional means is what I'm trying to say. So if you are in Middle Tennessee and Region 2 around Nashville, the Duck River can be a really great place to go out. The tailwaters down below Normandy Lake, you've got rainbows, brown trout, also great for bass. The Elk River is another one, same thing there. And then if you're looking for something more so just panfish or bass, I know the Narrows of the Harpeth can be a really great place to go, especially if the water's down and you can find those places where they're isolated in a little bit deeper pools. You can have a lot of good success catching smallmouth and a lot of panfish on the Harpeth River as well. So moving east into Region 3, the Caney Fork is a really popular place to pursue trout, and it's not far from Nashville. If you're in Middle Tennessee, you're in the Cookeville, Crossville area, I mean, this is right in your backyard, and it's a really popular place to go, and you can catch all sorts of trout. You know, you've got rainbows, browns, and every now and then I know they'll go in stocks and brooks as well. So it's a great place to go and learn. The Obie River, once you get up down below Dale Hollow Lake, there's a fish hatchery there actually that they stock trout pretty regularly in the Obie. And then also the Hiwassee, if you're down closer to Chattanooga, that can be a great place to go pursue some trout as well. And again, guys, this isn't an exhaustive list by any means. And if you are curious about places to go, feel free to shoot us an email afterwards or something, and we can try to point you in the right direction. But a lot of this information I'm pulling straight from the fishing guide. So we'll talk about that a little bit more here in a second. Continuing east into Region 4, this is where you get into some of your really prime trout fishing areas of the state. The Clinch River is a very popular place for trout fishermen, fly fishermen, and just people that like to use spinning rods and things as well. It's a great place to go and catch trout. We've even done a hunting and fishing academy fishing event on the Clinch River. So it's a really great place to go. Along with that, you've got the South Holston once you move up to Upper East Tennessee. That's some really good trout fishing up there as well as the Watauga. I know both of those are pretty much world renowned when it comes to trout fishing. You'll see a lot of people up there, especially during those early spring months, trying to get after some trout as well. And then if you're looking for some of the just smaller trout streams here in East Tennessee, you've got Laurel Creek in Johnson County. The Little River in Blount and Sevier counties is a very popular place if you're close to Knoxville to go out and kind of start maybe not wanting to go out on a big river just yet, but you know, some smaller streams. The Tellico River in Monroe County, and then Citico Creek. I've been to Citico. It's a really beautiful part of the state up there in mountains. You can go and find a lot of wild trout up there as well. So lastly, I just want to cover a couple quick regulation things, and then we're going to answer your guys' questions that you've got, and then we'll let you go for the evening. Just a reminder, we are not the ones that regulate the license requirements or anything like that. If you have specific questions about what license you need, I would recommend going and referencing your fishing guide or calling TWRA directly to make sure that you have everything you need. All of this information that you're seeing on the slide, I pulled directly from the fishing guide. If you don't have one of those, you can find them online. We're going to be sending you guys an email tomorrow that has a lot of additional information and additional resources in it, as well as where you can find that fishing guide. But basically, like I said, these are kind of the overall just more general fishing license, whether it's a 1 day or that kind of annual combo that you have. If you do plan to go trout fishing and you have that type 001, you do need to get the supplemental trout license, which is that type 022. But again, if you have any annual sportsman or any lifetime license, that basically covers you. You're good to go, pursue anything that you want species wise. But there are a few exceptions to that I would mention. I know if you're fishing around Gatlinburg and there's a couple other streams where you might have to buy an additional permit, just do your homework, go to the fishing guide. It has every stream in the state and all the different license requirements that you might need for it. And again, if you ever have questions, just be sure to reference that guide or call TWRA directly, and they will be sure to get you guys everything that you need, so you guys can go out and fish and be ready to go from a legal standpoint. One of the last things I want to cover is just statewide limits. And again, this all comes straight from the fishing guide, but it is important to note that there are many exceptions to this, especially when you start talking about trout. Some streams, some rivers have size requirements. There's different limits on how many you're able to bring home with you, things like that. So do your homework before you go out and fishing. Make sure that you're doing everything the right way. And again, if you have questions, let us know. Call TWRA. We can try to get you in touch with the people that you need to talk to. But these are just the more general statewide limits. Again, this is all found in your fishing guide. So for trout, you're looking at 7 trout per day. There's no minimum length from a general statewide limit. But again, that can be different depending on what stream or which body of water you're fishing. So be sure to look up where it is you planning to fish before you go out, so you know you're bringing home a legal fish. Crappie, you're looking at 15 with a 10-inch minimum length. And then for bluegill and brim, things like that, there's no limit, no minimum length. You can go out and catch as many of those as you want. And then largemouth and smallmouth bass, you're looking at 5 with no minimum length. But again, if you have a fishing guide, just be sure you reference that page 35 to 39. That's where you're going to see those exceptions. Make sure you're doing everything appropriately from a legal standpoint before you go out. And like I said, it's not a bad thing to ask questions. I know a lot of this can seem confusing, especially if it's new to you. It's the first time you're going out, but don't let that overwhelm you. There's plenty of people that can help answer these questions. We can help you get in touch with the right people. So if you need something or you have questions on any of the license requirements, just let us know. But it would be better to reference your guide and then contact TWRA directly, since they are the ones that regulate these requirements. So that's all I have as far as content goes. I just want to say again, thank you guys for joining us. If you do have questions, we're going to be on here for the next few minutes to kind of answer those. But if you need to go, you all are free to go at this point. But we're going to hang out for the next probably 5 to 10 minutes and just answer a few last minute questions. I know there was some in the queue that we hadn't got to yet. And before a lot of you guys start jumping off, be sure to check out our next virtual series. Sean's going to be back with us on May 25th, same time, same place, May 25th. We're going to be taking a deeper look into some of the things that we've talked about tonight, specifically the entomology side of things and how that relates to choosing which fly you need. Also, Sean's going to be sharing all his secret tactics on how he catches these big fish here in East Tennessee. So be sure to check that out. You can sign up at tnwf.org under the Hunting and Fishing Academy page, or some of you guys probably use the other means that you can sign up with as well on the gooutdoorstennessee.com system under the events tab. So be sure to check that out. Y'all are free to go for the most part, but we're going to hang out for a few minutes and answer some more questions. Let's see here. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And Sean or Chris, what other questions do we have in the queue that we can answer for folks before they head out for the night?
We've got several here. We'll jump back and answer Elise's question. She asked, is it better to fish when the dams are generating or still?
Yeah, that's a great question. Just depends on when the fish are biting. I've had it happen where, I've had killer days, no generation. I've had killer days when they're almost wide open. It seems to me that, especially your tailwaters, if you're targeting trout, a lot of it is on that rise and on that fall. It'll just kind of generate, rapid feeding. These fish kind of know the drill. They know, hey, we're either going to be blown out or, hey, we're going to be, potentially trapped in a little bit of a pool. that rapid fluctuation in water level often stimulates them to bite, but not always. And the best thing I can recommend for people, fishing your home waters, fishing the waters near you, is to keep a journal. Write everything down. Not only will it help you, kind of decipher what those fish are doing in your area on that particular stream or river, but it'll be great to look back on. I mean, absolutely wonderful to look back on. Take little notes, side notes too. Saw an osprey, saw an eagle, uh, saw a guy fall in the river and laughed so hard I almost puked. Anything like that. But those notes are really going to help you out. Absolutely.
Great, thank you. Edward asks, do any streams or counties, lakes require barbless hooks?
Well, that's a great question. To be honest with you, I don't know. Everything I fish barbless, or I try to. Every now and then one will sneak out on me. I know just outside our state, there's plenty of sections of different rivers in Arkansas that require barbless. I don't know, does the catch and release section in the Hiawassee do barbless only? Jeb or Taylor?
I'm
That's
not
a great
sure.
question.
That's not something I've really looked into a lot personally. But I mean, like we talked about earlier, if you go to that fishing guide, I know that when you're looking at the sections where it talks about specific streams, it lists all the different, specific requirements for that body of water. So if you were unsure about it, that's where I would start. But if you were still just wanting to get a real clear answer, I would maybe contact your wildlife officer in that area, because they're the ones that do the law enforcement. They would know the answer for that as well.
Yeah, thanks. A couple questions about strike indicators. So the first one is from Edward, and it says, do you use strike indicators on streams or in more still waters? And then William also asked, where on the line does the strike indicator go?
Yeah, those are both great questions. So I do use them on both. And the reason being is that fish, the same way a fish can kind of inhale, if they get that fur and metal and everything in their mouth and they say, whoa, something's not right, they're not going to just sit there and chew on it. They're going to just use their jet propulsion to just spit it right out. So I'll use both, and you've got various degrees of effectiveness on using it in still water. Sometimes you see that strike a little bit too late, but it's good to know, especially with making longer casts. You're gonna have more line out, you're gonna have more slack, hopefully not too much, but you're gonna have more line out on the water. And those strike indicators are great either way you run them. And as far as where to put them on the line, a good general rule is that you want at least 1.5 times the depth of water. So if you're fishing a lake, it's going to be hard to do. But what I'll do a little demonstration here. I like to run these cork strike indicators, just like this. Those ones featured in the picture. And the reason being is I like them. If something were to happen and this breaks off, it's all biodegradable. I don't feel bad that I just put plastic in one of our state rivers. And this you make a loop with the line, loop that loop around the indicator and cinch it down on this little that little rubber loop there. And if it's not working for you, change it. And that's what I'll say about just about anything. If your fly's not working, change it. If your indicator's not working for you, move it around. I generally try to start, you follow that rule of 1.5 times the depth, but that's not always the case. Sometimes you're fishing a shallow stream, and those fish, they can be educated on these, and you might have to make that longer, even though the river's really shallow. It depends. If your flies are dragging the bottom, and you're getting too much algae hanging up on too many rocks, and you're tired of dealing with it, shorten it up. But like I said, it just all depends, and don't be afraid to try moving it around. just mix things up a little bit.
We've got several more questions here. I'll ask just one or two of them, and then anything that's not answered here tonight live, we'll make sure we add those resources in on the email that we'll be sending out tomorrow night. I know we got some more specific questions about casting and lake and area specific fishing spots. So we'll try to add some resources there. But Sean, what about using live bait with a fly rod? Rick asks.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no hard fast rule that says you can't. My mentor, when I first started guiding, he actually got into fly fishing by just tying a hook on and putting salmon eggs on the end of that hook. It's still fly fishing. You know, if someone turns a nose at it, then that's fine. That's up to them. They can do that all they want to. You can enjoy yourself putting live bait on there. I will say, you know, once you get in it though, you'll probably want to just kind of venture into the world of sticking with the flies. But yeah, absolutely. There's nothing wrong with putting live bait on there. Make sure, like we talked about some, that you're within the regulations, you know. Don't say this guy Sean told me I could do this if you're in artificial only and using live bait. But yeah, there's nothing wrong with it at all.
It looks like there's one more on here, Sean. You can touch on a little bit. It says, "How?" William asks this: "How can you identify a good place to cast when you're on the river, or you're on the creek? You know, what are you looking for?" And I guess it depends on, you know, species as well. But what are you looking for when you're looking to make that initial cast? You know, is it structure? Is it you know, the rapids of the water? What are you looking for?
Right, right. Some of it does depend on species, but you know, even if you're talking about a river system, flowing current, for the most part, it's going to be very similar. You know, a fish's number one predator is going to be birds, you know, so they like having cover, whether that be, you know, more turbid water or more, you know, bubbles, deeper pool. And then, you know, fish have to eat. I mean, they spend a lot of energy every day just living in that river. But like I said, they're in that river. They're born in that river. Unless they're stocked, and even if they're stocked, they adapt quick. They know exactly where to go, or they'll figure it out. And what they do is what we do to try to identify these places where these fish can go, not have to fight the current and still get fed. Pretty much the river's a conveyor belt bringing them food. We look for what we call prime lie, and that could be, you know, a bigger deep pool with an eddy and those polarized glasses like we mentioned on the gear list. If the river's clear enough, they can help you see. And even if you're not fishing, I mean, it'll become a habit. You'll just want to look down in the river every time you're around one and try to find out where these fish are. But a lot of times you'll have them, say there's a series of rocks or a log out going across the stream. You might have heavily active feeding fish in front, but a lot of times you'll have even I mean, they'll still be feeding oftentimes, but you'll have fish behind or right out to the edge. And as that water flows around structures, it can generate different side currents. It can generate eddies, and even blow dams, big dams. You know, Chickamauga Dam, Watts Bar Dam, different flows, turbines kicking on at different times. These fish will find these places where they're doing is kind of keeping from flipping over, turning on their belly. So they're not spending a lot of energy, but they've got cover, and then they've got food being brought to them, and they're not spending energy. So that prime lie is what we're looking for. It might be two currents coming together and making a seam. And there again, that fish he's just going to be the peanut butter in there on that sandwich. He's going to be kind of pushed in there. He's not going to have to spend a lot of energy, and he's going to be munching, hopefully munching the whole time. And you can find fish that aren't feeding, but a lot of times if you stick around them long enough, they've got to eat something. And it might not be something that you're prepared or armed as far as fly goes to feed them, but they're going to be eating. And that's a great question. Just always, you know, pay attention, and keeping those notes like we talked about will definitely help you as well.
All right. Is that all the questions we've got there, Chris?
Yeah, we've got a few area specific questions, but I think that we can just include that resource. Maybe we can pick Sean's brain before we send the email out tomorrow and maybe put a few pointers into the email there, but
Okay,
I think that's pretty good for tonight.
great. Well, guys, we sure appreciate y'all spending an hour or so with us this evening. Just want to say thanks again for Sean spending some time going through talking about his experience with us. At this point, like I said, we'll go ahead and conclude for the night. But be sure to check out our next class, May 25th. Sean's going to be back. We're going to dive deeper into some of this stuff. But send us questions. Like I said, if we didn't get to something or you think of something later, just let us know. We'll be sure to send out the recording to everybody, as well as some additional resources here in the coming days. So that should pretty much wrap us up for the night. And we'll look forward to seeing you guys next time.
Yep. Thank you guys for joining. Thanks, Sean.
All right. Thank you guys.
Thank you guys.